Hey YouTube, time for the Classic Army Microgun Teardown, Part 3. We've already torn the whole thing apart, we've dived into the guts of the firing mechanism itself, so it's time for probably the thing that I'm going to enjoy the least, throwing away my hop-up settings and tearing down the barrel assembly to show you how this thing is built. So I guess let's just get into it. Let me get all this other crap off the bench and then we'll go. Alright, so I'm going to also work around the camera a little bit. Instead of setting it off at the angle I had earlier, I'm going to work with it parallel to the bench this time, so it's a little bit harder to get in here. Regardless, I think I'm going to start by pulling out these hop-up grub screws. There are 4 of them. Bye-bye hop-up settings. On the bright side, that bearing makes it really easy to get around this thing. Actually, before I go any further, here is the look down the barrel, or rather the magazine tube itself. And if I use a flashlight to just add some light in here, you'll notice that this is a cone taper, and it's actually quite smooth. So the molding here was done quite well. I can't tell quite what plastic this is, but I think it's polypropylene. It's meant to be low friction. The BBs feed all the way in here, and you'll notice that there are 2 screws that sit proud of the inner surface of the tube. Now you may think that that's accidental, but it's not. The idea behind those 2 screws is so that this follower doesn't go all the way into this mechanism, because if it falls out of the tube and into this mechanism here, it starts to rotate and potentially damage the spring. So long as it stays inside the rotating barrel assembly, its frame of reference stays fixed, and this spring doesn't have any torsion, twisting motion applied to it. So that's actually quite an interesting little hidden design feature. Regardless, let's keep going. There's some very long M4 screws. I don't think I've ever seen M4 socket head cap screws this long before. They're 11 centimeters long. That's quite a bit. Alright, now that we're that far along, I guess we can start taking apart all of the grub screws that hold these plates together, along with the 4 grub screws holding the barrel on. And eventually we'll be able to get to the 2 screws in here. But yeah, let's get into this. I think it's going to be this screwdriver. Nope, too small. Nope, I think I actually had it right the first time. Yep, there we go. You also notice that there's a hole right here. It's just a simple through hole. This hole is your reference point to not overfill the magazine with BBs, because the follower spring does need some room to compress. But yeah, it's a pretty simple, straightforward way to tell people don't overfill it. Now, at least my initial thought is that these rings are more for looks than anything. You could probably do one here and one here and maintain the rigidity. These 2, maybe they actually help with rigidity, but ultimately these are just the outer barrels. The inner barrels are inside. So I've loosened the grub screw. So I think all we just need to do is slide this off. Yeah. So it looks like these are potentially glass reinforced parts. I'm pretty sure they are. You can kind of see the pattern on the plastic. actually got that grub screw quite enough. Oh, maybe I did. Going off camera for a second. So for your reference, I'm just doing this and just walking the spacing plates up and off the outer barrel assembly. And then we've got this big one here. Okay, so those are now removed. Now I suppose we can remove these four, and we'll get to the good stuff. Can't remember whether that's just tightened on or whether we actually have to remove the screw completely. We might have to remove the screw completely. Alright, so we have one of the barrel assemblies off, and indeed we did have to remove that screw completely. This is a threaded hole for an M3 panhead screw, hex drive, 2mm. And really, I guess we'll take a look at one of the outer barrels because they're all the same. Pretty straightforward. There's no spacer inside the barrel except to the very end. And yeah, there's not a whole lot to this outer barrel. Perhaps on other country versions you have to have an orange tip here, so potentially you might have to dig into this and replace it. To remove the orange tips, you either repaint it or you'd have to tear it down as far as I've done and remove those hex drive screws. Well, we might have to actually go a little further. So let's take all the outer barrels apart because I want to show you the barrel assembly in full detail. So notice that these are just brass barrels. There's really nothing remarkable about them, I think. So that's all four outer barrels removed. Now I'm trying to remember how to actually get to the good bit. Alright, I figured it out. It's really just a friction fit. So you just have to get a little bit of force in here, and then this entire assembly slides up and out. And that's the inside. Let's get a little bit more light on this. That's just the inside. This is just a molded part. It really doesn't do anything except hold parts in alignment. There's just a couple through holes for the socket head cap screws, along with the barrel holes, and then the center hole for the BBs to go through. There's no real point in taking those two screws out, but if you so wanted to get to this barrel, you could do so by just removing those two screws. Alright, so let's look at this. This is the bearing. It is a 6816 RS. RS rubber seal. I'm curious how much a replacement bearing of this size costs. I'm going to look that up real quick. Okay, so this bearing actually isn't super expensive. It's maybe 10 to 15 Canadian. Granted, it's relatively expensive for a bearing compared to just, say, a 608 ZZ skateboard roller bearing, but again, pretty large bearing, and I guess in retrospect, when this bearing is assembled, it press fits into the outer housing, and while it takes radial load from the weight of the barrel, it also takes a bit of torsional load because the barrel itself wants to twist downwards by gravity. I suppose that is offset by the entire mechanism and body tying into the back of this, so this bearing doesn't actually experience very much torsional load, and it's all radial. So kudos to Classic Army for using, I guess, the right bearing and the right arrangement, because if they didn't secure it very well to the back of this, this would experience torsional load, that is twisting, and that would cause a premature failure. So I would honestly expect this bearing to last for the lifetime of the Microgun, to be honest. Alright, so now we're into the guts. You can see the 4 barrels and what look like small little metal clamps on either side of each barrel. So we're going to remove one, not all. And this is what one of the barrel assemblies on the Microgun looks like. There are 2 halves with the cutout notches to hold onto the barrel, and then here's the hop-up rubber itself. From the appearances of it, it is a bog-standard barrel and a bog-standard hop-up rubber. There is literally nothing remarkable about this, and the thing that comes to mind is, because it's a standard barrel with a standard cutout, you could, in theory, R-hop it. Not that that really matters, because this is accuracy through volume and not supposed to be a sniper rifle. But you could also make it an even tinier microgun, which on the surface sounds absurd, but because these are normal barrels, you could get a pistol-length barrel and shorten this down even more, getting it into smaller places. Again, though, you'd have to rebuild almost all the mechanics, all the outside bits. Would it really be worth it? I can't see it possibly being worth it. But it's more of an amusement. Let's take a quick second to look at these pieces that retain the barrel and keep it in alignment. They appear to just be die-cast zinc. There's literally nothing to regard here. They're either die-cast zinc or just pot metal, and they just fit into the grooves on either side of the barrel to hold it in place. So I suppose the only thing to comment on would be whether or not that set of metal clips is symmetrical. They do appear to be symmetrical, so you just have to make sure the hop-up is oriented facing outwards, so that or rather the cutout on the barrel is oriented towards the circumference of this housing. So that hop-up rubber is on all the way. Now if we can just get this assembly back together. So those metal clips actually do help orient the barrel rotationally inside the housing. I guess the only other thing to comment on this part is, what is it made of? I think it's also, again, glass reinforced fiber. It is a little disappointing to not see this be a metal component for the wear face of the gears. You can see a bit of wear mark. You can just make out the shading where the gear from the motor rests. I guess the only other thing that comes to mind is the quality of the barrels. If I hold this just right, you can see the machining marks. These aren't particularly good barrels. Potentially, if you put tight bores in here, you could get maybe not better accuracy, but better air economy for the FPS. Again, this is a microgun, and it's accuracy through volume, so do you really care about that? Yeah, I don't think so. Alright, so I've pretty much torn down the Microgun to its individual components. I don't think there's very much more to talk about in terms of the build and design quality. We've gone right down to the individual components, the polymers of construction, the design considerations. Honestly, it's pretty well designed, yet simplistic mechanism. There's not much to go wrong, there's not much to jam. It's kind of simple and elegant. The only thing that bothers me is that it runs out of BBs just so darn quickly. But I might do something about that in the future, and if you want to see more about it, make sure to subscribe to this channel. Make sure to hit the notification bell, and leave a comment if you've got any thoughts about what one could do inside the Microgun. I definitely think a feed mechanism to take a large hopper, like a backpack, and feed BBs into this thing would make it absurd but equally ridiculously fun. If only because you could potentially like role play in a game and be the heavy. I've been on an Escape from Tarkov kick recently, so I kind of know what it's like being just bullet hosed. So either way, tangents aside, if you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, comment, and peace out. No, I don't like that.